You know, some stories are about bread, some are about blood, and some are about the birth of a world-changing idea. The French Revolution, well, it's about all three. We're going to dive deep into one of the most chaotic, most violent, and frankly, most important events in all of human history. We're going to try and understand how an entire nation could literally tear itself apart to build something new. Okay, I want you to picture this. It's Paris, July 14th, 1789. The air is thick with tension and fear. Rumors are just flying everywhere. People are saying the king is about to send in his troops to massacre them. So what do? Well, you get desperate. You need weapons. And so, thousands of ordinary people start marching on the Bastille, this massive medieval fortress that just looms over the city, a perfect symbol of the king's oppressive power. And by the end of that day, the Bastille had fallen. The commander was dead. They were literally starting to tear it down, brick by brick. I mean, the shockwave from this one event was felt all across Europe. It just begs the question, right? How does a society get to that point? That absolute boiling point where regular people will tear down a fortress with their bare hands. So, to really get a handle on that explosion, we've got to look at what made the powder keg in the first place. And that means we have to talk about 18th century French society, something historians call the Old Regime. All right, so back then, French society was basically split into three buckets, super rigid. You had the first estate, that's the clergy, the church folks. Then the second estate, the nobility, all the lords and ladies. And the third estate, well, that was just everybody else. And I mean everybody, from the poorest farmer to the richest businessman. And this etching, wow, it just nails the feeling at the time. It was a super popular cartoon, and it tells you everything you need to know. The nobleman is the spider, just sitting there, getting fat. And the peasant is the fly, caught in the web. The fly provides everything, the food, the money, the work, and for what? Just to get eaten in the end. It's a brutal but pretty accurate picture of how things were. And get this, that third estate, the fly in the web, wasn't some small group. We're talking about 97% of the population. Just let that sink in. Almost everyone. And here's the kicker, they were the only ones paying taxes. The other two estates, the ones with all the land and wealth, they paid basically nothing. It's just fundamentally unfair. So by the time we get to the late 1780s, France is in the middle of a perfect storm. I mean, a total crisis. First, the government is completely broke. They'd spent a fortune on wars. And yeah, they even helped fund the American Revolution, which is kind of ironic. Then there's not enough food. The population was growing. Harvests were bad, so the price of bread, the main thing people ate, just went through the roof. Millions were starving. And on top of all that, who's paying for everything? The third estate. The ones who are already hungry and struggling. It was a system just waiting to collapse. Okay, but being hungry and angry, that's not always enough to start a revolution. You need something else. You need ideas. You need a new way to see the world, a new language to actually voice that anger, and, a vision for something better. And boy, were there ideas. Thanks to the Enlightenment, these new philosophies were spreading like wildfire. You had thinkers like John Locke and Rousseau who were basically questioning everything. They were saying, hey, maybe a king doesn't get his power from God. Maybe it comes from the people. And then you just had to look across the Atlantic. The American Revolution had just happened. It was living proof that you could kick out a king and build a country based on these radical new ideas. And it wasn't just the French who felt something was coming. This quote here, it's from an English guy traveling in France in 1787, just 2 years before it all kicked off. And it is just chilling. He could feel it in the air, that resentment, that anger, that sense that something incredibly violent was about to happen. And then, in 1789, it happened. The powder keg finally exploded. What comes next is a decade of pure chaos, of wild experiments and unimaginable violence. A decade that, honestly, changed the world forever. I mean, just look at the speed of this thing. It is absolutely dizzying. In 1789, you have an absolute king. Just 2 years later, his power is limited by a constitution. A year after that, the monarchy is gone completely. France is a republic. Then in 93, they execute the king, and that's when things get really crazy with the Reign of Terror. It's just one massive change after another, until this shaky government called the Directory takes over. This right here, this is the moment it all becomes real. So the king tries to shut them down, literally locks the representatives of the Third Estate out of their meeting hall. So what do? They just find another room, an indoor tennis court, and they take an oath. They declare themselves the National Assembly, the true representatives of France, and they swear they won't leave until they've written a new constitution. This was an open act of defiance. It was them saying, we have the power now, not you. And then they did something that just sent shockwaves across all of Europe. They put their own king, Louis XVI, on trial for treason, and they found him guilty. On January 21st, 1793, he was executed by guillotine. I mean, that's it. There is no going back from that. You've not only killed a man, you've killed the whole idea of monarchy in France. So the king is dead, and now France is at war with pretty much all its neighbors, who are terrified this revolution thing might spread. The pressure is immense. And the revolution starts to, well, it starts to eat itself. The government, now led by this guy Maximilien Robespierre, decides the only way to save the revolution is to get rid of all its enemies. And that's how the reign of terror begins, a nationwide purge. And if you want to understand the mindset, you really have to listen to what Robespierre himself said. He basically argued that terror was just a form of justice, swift, severe justice, that it was the only way to protect the fatherland in a time of crisis. It's a terrifying piece of logic, and it was used to justify thousands upon thousands of executions. But a government can't run on terror forever. Eventually, the revolution turned on Robespierre himself, and he met the same fate as his victims. But what was left was just more chaos, more instability, a total power vacuum. And into that vacuum steps a brilliant, ambitious, and incredibly popular young general, and you probably know his name, Napoleon Bonaparte. So after a decade of war, terror, and chaos, what did it all amount to? When the dust settled, what was the legacy? Well, it's complicated. It's a story of some of the most beautiful ideals ever written down and some of the most horrifying contradictions. Just look at this contrast. On one side, you have this incredible document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, promising liberty and equality for everyone. Amazing, right? But then you have the reality. You have thousands of women marching on Versailles, not because they'd read Rousseau, but because their children were starving and they needed bread. The ideals were lofty, but the reality on the ground was often very different. And if you dared to point out these contradictions, the revolution could be absolutely brutal. There was this amazing woman, a playwright named Olympe de Gouges. She saw the rights of man and said, hey, what about us? She wrote her own version, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman. And for that, for demanding that liberty and equality apply to everyone, the revolutionary government sent her to the guillotine. But for all its darkness, for all its hypocrisy, you just can't deny the impact. It was world-changing. The monarchy in France was gone for good. And those three little words, liberty, equality, fraternity, they became a rallying cry for people fighting for freedom everywhere. The revolution basically invented a new way to talk about politics. This idea that you, as an individual, have rights, that you're a citizen, not a subject. That language, it inspired revolutions for the next 200 years. And that really brings us to the central question, the paradox of the French Revolution that we still struggle with. It gave the world this new language of rights, the very foundation of modern democracy. But it came at the cost of so much violence, so much blood. So how should we remember it? Was the terror a betrayal of its ideals? Or was it somehow the terrible price you have to pay to build a brand new world? There's no easy answer. And that's what makes it so important to keep asking the question.